All right, here we are. Okay. Oh, wow. All right, a little bit of action already. So, yeah, thank you, Jimmy, for doing this. Let me address the folks here at home. Welcome to iWizard, guys. So, I have a special episode for you today. I'm chatting with Jimmy Nuts from the Fantasy Network. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here hanging out. Nice to chill out after a busy day, and just talk some books and everything else.
Busy day at work, Jimmy?
Yeah. Doing everyone else's job, that kind of thing. It's always fun.
All right, so Jimmy, why don't we start with this? This is my first time meeting you in person. I guess this is not in person, sort of in person. Tell folks at home who may not be subscribed to your wonderful channel who you are and how did you decide to get into BookTube? What made you want to turn the camera around? You have an interesting background too, because you started out actually as a wrestler. So maybe you could go into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know, the Fantasy Network is a very terrible pun that doesn't make any sense unless if you know my name. So it's a really bad way of introducing yourself to YouTube and not good at all for the SEO or any of that stuff. But, instead of network, I was going to do the Fantasy Network, but I said, let's make it the Nutwork. My name's Jimmy Nuts, ha, ha, ha. And I just started it because I was really inspired by a podcast that I listened to for many years. And I had started to get to know the creators pretty well. And that was Bend the Knee, which is a Song of Ice and Fire podcast with, at the time, it was Matt and Ezra. And funny enough, now I am the co-host of that show. Ezra has moved on. Yeah, so I do the co-hosting over there. And that show is kind of what made me want to get into content creation because I just loved what they were doing. Matt and Ez had such a good relationship on air, and you could tell that they had been friends for a long time. And you almost felt like you were just listening to two people kind of hang out, which generally I think those are the best podcasts. You can find, for instance, you could find a million true crime podcasts, but the ones that feel like true banter are probably the ones that you're going to want to tune into. So I jumped in because of that. And that's why my first video is, should you still read A Song of Ice and Fire? Because the show ending sucked. And it's just, it's zoomed in like this. I had just cut weight for a jiu-jitsu competition. So I was like starved and I'm just screaming at the camera. And I'm like, you definitely should read it, terrible video. And yeah, that's basically what happened. And I knew I wanted to find other books that I could love as much as A Song of Ice and Fire. Like that was the whole mission, because I know a lot of people, the only thing that they've read as an adult is A Song of Ice and Fire. So I felt like that was a worthy cause that people could get behind. And I think I've kind of left that behind. I mean, I'm still looking, but like, that's not really the mission anymore. It's kind of fallen into the background because, as we do these type of things and make videos and whatnot, like your goals change or your focus changes. And I just kept finding books I enjoyed and kept talking about them. So it's kind of how I arrived here on this crazy platform.
And the wrestling, what's up with that?
Yeah. So I grew up, I was white trash. So I liked wrestling. It's just kind of how it worked. And I mean, I couldn't help it. So I just remember watching wrestling. I remember I didn't know why I knew who Hulk Hogan was, but I knew who he was. And I just remember asking my grandpa, who did like wrestling at the time, I want to watch Hulk Hogan. And he was like, okay, tell your mom to turn it on this channel at this time. And like the first thing I see is I watched WCW, and I just remember like seeing the Macho Man in the audience calling out Hogan for Uncensored 97. And it's very vivid to me because it felt like what, you turn it on, there's a guy in the audience yelling at the guy in the ring. I'm like, what is going on? I don't know anything about wrestling. I'm 7 years old. And I never grew out of it, man. I just never did. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. I started a kind of a backyard wrestling type thing like most kids do, but I took it to the next level and we made DVDs and we edited them together in Windows Movie Maker back in the day. We sold them at school and I was making like good money off this stuff. Yeah. And then we ran a live event after like 3 years and we got 100 people to come to our show. We had entrance music and We lit a table on fire. It was crazy.
Was it a real ring, or was it like your trampoline in the backyard?
So no, we had a trampoline next to this thing, but you built what you would call a base. I'm so glad to get to talk about this because no one talks
Well,
about
I grew up watching wrestling, but I didn't know any of the terms. Like I was watching WCW, right? I was watching. It was because my stepdad watched it, so it was like Sting and Mankind and The Undertaker, and it was the kayfabe. You know, I just I really enjoyed it as a kind of like pure entertainment. But yeah, go ahead. I'm fascinated by this.
All right, so basically, you took wooden pallets and we did 20 by 20, and then we put tires because my friend's dad owned a used auto auction and a junkyard. So we got a bunch of tires and we lined the tires up 20 by 20, and then we did another stack of tires, kind of offset, and then we did plywood and then carpet padding and a tarp, and then you would nail the tarp down, and then we would spray paint the tarp with our logo, and we'd wrestle on that thing. And surprisingly, it was pretty neat because with the tires, I mean, it was a good like 4 feet off the ground. And I don't think anyone I remember the fact that my friend's parents let us do this is insane. Like it is insane that they let us do this, but I don't think they realize the scale of the operation. And that's been a common theme in my life. Like I always take things too far. Or I take them past what people are expecting. Like they're like, oh, he'll grow out of this, or he'll stop being obsessed with this. And I just never did. So I did that. And then, after high school, all my friends went to college. I didn't. And I said, let's go train. And I started training. Actually, I started training really when I was still in high school. I was 17 years old. I went to the Kaiser, West Virginia Volunteer Fire Department. And Leslie Leatherman and Shane Shadows beat me up for 9 hours one day. And I came back the next day. And then I came back again. And that's how it all started, man. I started getting on little shows. And then I did more training up in Pittsburgh at some time. And then I did some stuff at the Ring of Honor dojo out in Philadelphia, out in Bristol, PA, when it was still there. And it was another time. Feels like a different person, really.
Yeah, no, that's very reminiscent of my rambling boyhood. My parents had a big back deck thing, and there was a pool underneath, an above ground pool. So the deck was really high, and then the backyard sloped down, and then it evened out to this flat part. And we had a trampoline there. And so what my friends would do is they would set up a camcorder, point it at the trampoline and put the zoom on, and they would throw a football from the back deck, and we would get into groups of like 4 and jump on the trampoline and we would jump as high as we could and fight each other in the air to try to catch the ball. So you'd have, kids bouncing off into, right next to the trampoline too was a thorn bush, was a gigantic pricker bush, and people would double bounce and just fly into the pricker bush and go home with like thorns sticking out of their cheek and things like that. And so my parents weren't very popular but
I was definitely like the kid whose parents didn't want you to hang around, not because I was terrible, but because I just always had a bad idea. And I executed it very well. So
yeah. I had a friend like that who decided to turn my entire backyard into an ice skating rink by just leaving our hose on. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that you do. In America, we're all spread out. We're living in the suburbs. You have these kids running around outside. So a lot of mayhem. Let's get to this, Jimmy. Talking about my earlier question, what would you say is your brand as a booktuber? I hate to put it that way because it sounds like you're guarding your brand or something like that. But what differentiates what you do as a booktuber from other booktubers? Do you think? What would you say is your unique angle? What's your channel's personality? Because I know I was drawn to your channel and a few other people's channels for very specific reasons. But I'm wondering what you think makes your channel unique.
Well, I think I do excel in long form conversation. And I think at the time, whenever I started chatting with NUTTS, that wasn't something that you saw a ton of. I'm sure I didn't invent podcasting by any means, obviously, but I knew that the best me comes out in those. I've always been very keen on getting to know people and asking them questions about themselves. And I just, life's a very interesting thing. And what I perceive as reality is completely different from maybe what you perceive as reality. Right. And I learned a lot about conversating with people whenever I was on the road for wrestling, because I would go and sit in a diner. I sat at the, man, what was that diner called? Like Salt and Pepper, maybe. I don't know. It was in Easton, PA, and I loved eating at that diner. And I would go in there before the show. I'd get in there early, get a workout in, and I would go eat, at the diner. And I'd be sitting next to a truck driver or whoever it might be, and I would just talk. I would just talk to them, because I was lonely. I was bored, trying to stay out of trouble. And so I would just conversate with people. And I did that everywhere. I did that in Waffle Houses in the middle of nowhere, Ohio before. And I think that experience, and also public speaking in wrestling, gave me enough confidence to feel like, okay, I can talk about books in a way that maybe other people cannot, and I can express myself fairly clearly. Sometimes I've taken a lot of lumps to the head, so I don't feel like I'm as clairvoyant as I used to be. But when it comes to the book stuff, I mean, outside of that, I would say when I do reviews, I try to look at aspects of the book beyond my own subjective experience, and I try to evaluate it for the people watching me. And I take it very serious that people spend money on books. And if someone picks up a book because I recommended it, I want them to know about the book. Whether or not I like it is almost, I'm sure people weigh that in their decision, but my goal is to look at it from all angles. So even if I don't like something about it, I might be able to say, like Nevernight by Jay Kristoff's a really good example. That book is not for me at all, but like I see strengths in that book, and I like to highlight those strengths, even though I didn't necessarily love that book. I thought it was just okay. So I guess being a perpetual fence sitter is something I've said many, many times, and I guess that's how I review books. We're still trying to get my opinion across. So I guess that's what makes me different. I also have a talking head, Bobby B. I think Kev said in the chat, I'm basically the Bobby B guy, which I'm fine with. I like that.
Someone in the comments, Garrick Reeds, says, BookTuber, isn't he a One Piece stan?
Yeah. So my other channel, I have another channel. I broke out my manga content to a channel called Dudes Talking Manga, and I did start covering One Piece. And it has taken over my life a little bit because I love it. It's real, it's one of those things. Who would have thought that the most popular manga in the world was good? Right. So why was I surprised? Of course, it's probably good. Like there's millions of it's literally probably the biggest fandom in the world right now.
I know,
for good reason. I think, especially after reading the first 100 and so chapters, it's really something special. So I'm still a booktuber though at heart.
What do you love about manga? Because one of the things that I've heard repeatedly is when you have a channel and your channel's growing, there's this pressure. I've heard this from numerous booktubers to open up and go in the manga direction so that you get this whole entirely new fan base. And there's this question of, do you really like manga? Are you trying to just grow your fan base? I've never touched manga. I don't know anything about it. What do you like about it? What drew you to it? I imagine you just intrinsically enjoy it. Make the case for me. Why should I read manga?
Well, so I'll begin and say this. I would never do anything for the sole idea of growing an audience, because I'm bad at fake, which is funny because I was a wrestler and that's fake fighting. But like I'm bad at faking genuine enthusiasm. It's not something I'm very good at. But also like I just, I've always done this for fun, and I have a ton of stuff that I work on. So I really try to focus on things I like doing. Right. So for me, I was not a fan of anime and manga very much, besides Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z was the most formative piece of media in my life, actually, more than anything else. However, I did not like the anime stuff because there's a lot of tropes, right? Like we know what they are. Girls are always dressed very risque, presented in a certain way, and I just didn't vibe with me. And then, if you start talking to people who read books, there is a different mix of people who actually read manga and books, which to me is not that surprising because it's still storytelling at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it was like, okay, well, it is storytelling. And then I have these people who are reading my books I like, and they're saying, hey, not all manga is like that. Like there is stuff over here that you would really enjoy and is a lot deeper than you think. And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And it started out pretty much with Attack on Titan and Berserk. And Attack on Titan has none of the just over sexualized content. None of it. It's not there. I mean, the Titans are like technically like giant naked people, but they don't have any details, so it doesn't matter, right? So with that, I was like, oh, okay, I do like this. And it dawned on me, hey, this is just a different way of storytelling. And there's something very specific about manga that I like. I am not a visual person. I do not visualize when I read. I have trouble. There's a term for it. I guess Mark Lawrence has it. He's like ripping off my gimmick. Apparently he can't remember people's faces either. So with manga, it is so much different for me because when I'm reading, I'm just reading words and I might have stick figures in my head or something, right? With manga, I see the entire picture. And then I get to see intricacies within the illustration that could actually tell a piece of the story that's unwritten. And to me, that's awesome. Like I love expression of story. And that's why I also loved wrestling. Like that was my number one thing I loved about professional wrestling was I got to tell a story. And that story was generally always good versus evil, but it's a story that has been from the beginning of time and it still sells today. And that's also why I don't watch wrestling anymore because there's stuff there, but it's a much different product than I fell in love with.
It's funny you were talking about. I think one of the things that drew me, and I try to kind of split my attention between all the different channels that I'm supposed to be following. And sometimes I leave a comment and sometimes I don't. But you can tell it's kind of palpable that you have a kind of unique, interesting intellectual background, right? Coming out of wrestling, being a software engineer. I have an interesting intellectual background as well. I became a mail carrier straight out of high school, and I was playing in a band on the side, and we were doing gigs and bars and parties, and that got boring. So I decided to go to college, right? I was reading all these philosophy books, and I got my BA in philosophy, and I got a bachelor's in English as well, and then went to grad school, and now I teach at a charter school. But I can kind of tell when someone has an interesting kind of idiosyncratic intellectual background, and that's one of the things I actually like about your channel is that you seem to come at it from a different direction, which I appreciate. But one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is that you're one of a cadre of people, as I said, that I watch in this little world of ours, like the world of BookTube, which is actually a really big world. Like there are a lot of booktubers out there, but I feel like there's this smaller community that you're a part of that I engage with because I feel it's kind of disconnected from the wider world of BookTube in some way, and that sort of thing. And I think what marks it, Jimmy, is I think there's a level of thoughtfulness, right? So when I'm watching your videos or Johanna's, or there's Alan or Philip, Murphy, AP, Moyd, all those guys, there's just a crew of people that I like to listen to that go a little bit deeper, that have longer discussions with other thoughtful creators, right? About these very kind of niche, sometimes metafictional things. I just watched a video with you and Johanna and Murphy and Alan. You guys were talking about pacing and plot in literature. And I think this conversation went over 2 hours. And everyone in the panel was so insightful. And I actually wanted to ask you about that. You said in that chat that you like slow builds, and that you like books that have a slower pace, and that often when you're doing read-alongs, when other people are getting bored and complaining about the slow pace of a book, that's when you're having the most fun. Why is that, do you think? Why do you like that?
I've asked myself this question a lot, and I think part of it has to do with watching Dragon Ball Z, where they power up for 75 episodes in a row, just yelling. No, I'm just kidding. The show has the worst pacing of all time. Like literally, it's the worst paced show ever. But you know what's interesting is that I felt this way in wrestling as well. I always loved whenever I was able to go 30, 40, 60 minutes sometimes. The longest I ever wrestled was an hour and 20. And I always liked taking my time. because I think when you take your time and you slow things down, you can really dig into like little things, like the way someone drinks a cup of coffee, which I use that example actually on purpose because Cormac McCarthy did this
Yes.
in The Crossing, I believe. It might have been All the Pretty Horses, but
It's
notoriously,
definitely in All the Pretty Horses. It may be in The Crossing too, which I haven't read, but I actually noticed that as well in All the Pretty Horses.
he even talks about how I'm forgetting his name now, but he takes the case the tortilla and slides it around the plate, gets rest salsa, takes a drip of coffee, and it says run-on sentence. And there was a critic, new modern critic, and he said that this is garbage writing. It's way too verbose, all these things. And somebody else pointed out, an older critic pointed out that it's actually a sign of nervousness, that he's playing with his food because he's nervous about the situation. And then if you slow down to take a look at where he is and what he's doing, you're like, oh yeah, he would be very nervous. He's in the middle of this restaurant that he has no idea, and it's basically a stranger's house in the scene. So I find I'm weird. I find a lot of value in that little moment there. So I like whenever someone takes their time. Now, the thing about it is that if you're going to do that, it's a good idea to pay it off. Like you got to have the banger ending, which is why I like Tad Williams so much. Like I know he's long-winded, but I've always felt satisfied by his endings, and that's awesome to me. That it's worth it. It's worth that time that we spend. And I don't know. I think it also has to do with growing up reading Lord of the Rings and then A Song of Ice and Fire and stuff. Those are slower books, which is funny because I feel like back in the day, George R. R. Martin was almost considered, not a schlock writer, but like, oh, he's that modern kind of thrills and kills garbage, which, now we look at him and go, oh, he's slow paced. It's just funny how that changes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. That what you said there, Jimmy. It's fascinating to me, being kind of an outsider to the whole speculative fiction community, especially the online contingent of it. There are so many strange little hangups and neurotic fixations that I'm seeing that are utterly mystifying to me as someone who comes from a contemporary and classic literature background. Just stuff that you don't hear in this community. You don't hear the same things when people are just reading regular non-genre literature. Mm-hmm. One of the odder ones to me, and maybe you can explain this, Jimmy. I asked Jake Bishop about this when he was on, and I'm still mystified by it. One of the odder things to me is this obsession with stuff needing to happen all the time. And by happen, what people I think usually mean is action scenes, earth-shattering events, like a death or a war or a coronation. Someone has fallen in love or gotten married or been dumped or gotten divorced. Some victory has been won, or there's a twist. And so that is what people want. They want things to just happen. One thing after another, they want things to happen. And, which I think too is why you see people erupting over the most, the tiniest little spoilers, right? They will go into over the top histrionics if anyone should commit the most grievous sin of the spoiler, right? And what's interesting to me, Jimmy, is that as an English and philosophy major, I am telling you, I had never heard the word spoiler once, not once, until I started fraternizing with fantasy and sci-fi people. And one of the big reasons that you don't, when you're an undergrad and you're reading the canon, you don't read Charles Dickens's David Copperfield to find out what happens next. You read David Copperfield because of Dickens's evocative power and his ability to speak to the human condition in a universal way. You read David Copperfield because there has never been a novel ever published that better speaks to or embodies the phenomenal consciousness of a child, right? You think Stephen King writes compellingly about the angsty woes of childhood, and he kind of does, but try Dickens, right? My point is that you could spoil the ending of Great Expectations or David Copperfield, and even if I hadn't read it, I'd still want to read it. Would I be mad? Yes, I'd be a little bit mad. The experience of reading is definitely different if you don't know the plot event is coming.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, it depends on the genre. If you're spoiling stuff in a mystery novel or a horror novel, right, that's terrible. Actually, that's catastrophic. Because there are certain genres which, by their very nature, spoilers are, a big no-no. But when it comes to great literature, like, take Melville or Henry James or Kafka or Cormac McCarthy, if you give spoilers, it's not nice, I guess. You might be a jerk, but it's barely going to impact your enjoyment of the book, because so much of the delight and the profundity is in the journey and in the sort of sentence level writing and in the dialogue and the thematic explorations. And I feel the same way, Jimmy, about George R.R. Martin. I think he's brilliant. And you could spoil any of his books had I not read them. And I'd be pissed, but it would barely disturb or take away from the reading experience. Can you explain this phenomenon? Because I think it connects to this very long conversation you guys had about pacing and plotting and things like that. And it seems like fantasy and sci-fi readers expect something different, and I'm still kind of mystified by that.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a lot to unpack, right? One, genre matters when we're talking about just spoilers in general, I think. A lot of people read to find out what happens next, and that's okay. I think that is probably the majority of readers, especially any specific genre of readers. Whenever you look at people like, famous critics like Harold Bloom, or, pick any of them, right? They are very big on read the book once, start it over, read it again, like 2 times minimum. A lot of people will read books whenever they're going through it for what we're talking about with, like, Dickens or whatever else it might be. I think that's actually a really wise thing. And the difficult part is that fantasy does have some of those sensational elements of mystery, right? If someone were to had spoiled the Red Wedding for me, I would have been furious, right. Even though someone who's read the series multiple times, it is an experience to see how we get to that point. I just read Catelyn's second chapter in A Storm of Swords and did an episode on Bend the Knee about it. And I'm like, oh, this is it. Like, this is when everything went to, this is hundreds of pages before, but this is the moment that did it. This sealed fate. And so that's a different experience, right? It comes down to why someone's reading, I think. What are you trying to get out of it? I wish I reread more. I wish sometimes when I finished a book, I would start it over. I just read the Trader Baru Cormorant, and I figured out what happened. And now I'm like, I kind of want to go back and really look at more of the colonialization that Seth Dickinson was exploring in that book, because I think I may have missed some of the weight of that, even though it affected me and it was very good. I would like to go back and think about those things a little bit more. So there's so much RAM, memory in our brain that to handle things at once. But I think ultimately it comes down to why you're reading. Now, to the question of why do we always need stuff to happen? I don't know, dude. I don't know. I don't agree with that. Like, John Gardner has a quote where basically he says that plot is a series of realizations, and you can do that in a conversation. You can actually do that over a cup of coffee or whatever else it might be. It might even be the way someone does a menial task they've always done and doing it a little bit differently. That can be a realization, and that moves the plot forward. My biggest complaint with book reviews is when someone just is like, nothing happened in this book. I'm like, well, that's not true. That's literally not true. Maybe it didn't have fireworks, but something happened in this book, almost assuredly. So that's always been a big pet peeve of mine. Whenever I see someone say that, I generally don't check out that the reviews anymore. I just don't. So I think that has something to do with it. And also for the fantasy genre, and it's kind of this Atlanta Valley saying here, right? The answer is obvious. Why should things happen? Because a story can't have depth unless everyone is destroying each other and the world or something like that. Haven't you read a fantasy novel? So I see what you're saying. Especially in fantasy, we fall into this thing. If the stakes aren't massive, then why should I care? Right. But stakes can be massive for different reasons and on different scale. I think that, again, Cormac McCarthy does a great job of setting up stakes for just the individual. And maybe in Blood Meridian, also setting the stakes for humanity, possibly through a series of events, falling around some absolutely terrible people. But there's also the thing about this. Fantasy is a genre fiction, right? And there are people, and Tad Williams said this to me. He said there are going to be people who buy books because they have a dragon on the front.
Yeah.
Those people exist, and those people are important. They're the lifeblood of the genre, actually. And I like dragons on the front of my books.
I know, me too.
But those people, so like fantasy does have that, right? Like that does have that stigma of these things need to happen for it to be a fantasy. However, the genre has grown, and the genre is capable of so many things, and it is so much different than it was 60, 70 years ago, whenever it really was, becoming a genre. So we get this weird thing where a lot of the stuff that gets bubbled up to the top is great fantasy in the sense of the genre fantasy, and then some of the other stuff that actually might be appreciated by people outside who don't really like fantasy gets kind of shoved down, So it's tough.
Oops, I think Philip Chase is here.
Oh, look at this guy.
Hey, can you hear us?
Jimmy.
What's up, man?
What are you doing here, man?
I just stumbled in. They let me in. I don't know why.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, they let in anybody these days.
How's it going?
Hey, Jordan, what's up?
How's it going, man? Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for letting me in.
It's delightful to see. Oh, sorry. Were you waiting for a while?
No.
I was like wrapped and absorbed in what Jimmy was saying, and now I want to respond, and maybe you could jump in too. I don't know if
I think Jimmy was sounding very intelligent there.
I know. I agree. He always sounds intelligent, and so I'm going to ruin that right now. Yeah, Jimmy. I actually agree with all of that, and I don't want to sound like a snob or an elitist, because I am like the guy, when I finish a difficult book, I will read like an airport book. I will read John Grisham, or I will read some Tom Clancy-esque, thriller, which, it isn't worth the paper it's printed on, just because it gives me a brain break, and, it's, low stakes for me, and I can kind of just shut my brain off and almost do it like I'm watching TV and stuff like that. But at the same time, I also want fantasy to be better. And I would love for fantasy to take itself seriously so that other people take it seriously. And I do feel like sometimes the way that fantasy fans read is this very juvenile. I know it sounds mean, but I just sometimes think it's an impoverished and almost Philistine way of reading literature. Just the way in which so many fantasy fans talk about fantasy and sci-fi almost entirely with respect to the characters and plots. When you log into Discord and you talk to people, or when you watch a booktuber do a book review, they talk about the plot and how excited they are that this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and wasn't that badass? And I wonder what's going to happen next. And usually they'll talk about characters and world building. And sometimes you'll hear them say, isn't Pat Rothfuss's prose divine? But you rarely hear deeper discussions. I just want to see more of this, of what are the different moral visions at play in this book, and how do they conflict? How does the novel speak to the human condition? How do people relate to place or culture or identity? What are the deep human truths or universal themes and ideas that the author's playing with, and how do the characters intersect with those themes? And again, I'm not trying to be an elitist. I enjoy a good old fashioned whiz bang, like military sci-fi novel too, Jack Campbell, that sort of thing. But I guess I was weaned on a literary tradition where you have works like Richard Ford's Independence Day. This book is about a divorced real estate agent who lives in Haddam, New Jersey. And he's this very deep, introspective, existential guy who used to be a sports writer. And now he tries to sell people houses. And it's all about him just reckoning with his divorce. And the whole plot is this. Basically, the guy shows some people some houses, and then he picks his delinquent son up from his ex-wife, and they take a trip to the Springfield, the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. And then they go to Cooperstown, New York, and they go to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And it's his inner reflections, his relationship with his son, and it's him making sense of his life. Try to spoil that for me. There is literally nothing you could do to spoil that book for me. And yeah, it's a slice of life, and it's structured like, it's not structured like some ancient epic, but I also feel like you couldn't really spoil Homer's Odyssey and enjoy the reading experience. Does that make sense? Do I sound like a total absolute snob here, guys?
No, so I don't think that's why you read.
Hello.
That speaking of why you read, there's why read herself. Johanna.
Hello.
Hi, Johanna.
Hi.
I mean, some people are going to hear that and be like, I like my lasers and fireballs, screw off. That like some people are going to hear
that. I really do.
Philip, what do you think?
I think there's room in every genre for reads that are entertaining and fast-paced and plot-driven, and stories that I think Jordan put it very eloquently, that are theme-driven, that get people thinking about the deeper questions about human experience and existence. And I started my channel really with the assertion that fantasy is a genre that has lots of reads that are conducive to critical exploration. So obviously I lean in that direction myself in terms of my personal taste, but I am absolutely fine, not just fine. I think it's wonderful that we have stories in our genre that are just enjoyable and that we can wow over the massive epic battles and all that stuff. I love that too. And frankly, a lot of my favorite reads, like Malazan, for example, have it all. They have it all. I mean, they have the epic battles with blood tornadoes and you name it. They have the introspection and the exploration, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And we have good friends who read Malazan because they love the action and they love the battle scenes and they love, and then there are those of us who like Toll the Hounds. So
take that, Alan.
Alan, that is because
in particular there, I don't know.
Philip. Someone in the comment section is saying Alan gonna be pissed that Johanna and Philip are the surprise guests. And I had Alan in my head. That's Philip. That's because you are so well-adjusted and not alienated and magnanimous in every way. What a sweet guy Philip is. I'm like his alter ego.
Just an all-arounder.
I'm the devil on his shoulder. But no, I appreciate that. All makes sense, Philip.
I want to hear what Johanna thinks.
No, I totally agree with everything you said. I think Malazan is like a great example, like looking at your experience versus Alan's. Speak of the devil.
None of what was just said about Philip is true. I don't know why you're lying on this platform.
Go tell him.
I did not expect to see Alan.
Yeah,
Alan has been online.
I know. No one expected to see me. I know, but Johanna.
I'll tell you why. Because you've been online on PlayStation playing Wolong for 5 straight days. This man has not slept.
We just platinumed Wolong, by the way. Like we just platinumed it, and it's a good thing that you don't have to play that stupid boss stage where you got to fight 6 bosses in a row without. We're like, screw that.
Now that Alan's here, I'm gonna finish my dinner.
No, I totally agree with you though, Philip. So I'm sorry, what?
Nothing. Go.
No, I was just saying that.
Thanks for having me, by the way.
Sorry. Thanks for coming, Alan. Appreciate it.
I'm surrounded.
Yeah,
we're just talking about Toll the Hounds, Alan.
We were talking about Toll the Hounds.
I heard it.
But like, I mean, Alan was saying that in our pacing discussion. He said, I like Malazan for totally different reasons than some people, Philip, like Malazan. It was very
I heard that. I did hear that.
And that's why it's one of the biggest conversations that we have in the sphere, because it does have so much to it. The one thing that happens with Malazan that is bothersome at times is that, someone like Alan who appreciates something totally different kind of gets pushed aside for things that I think that just kind of get repeated ad nauseum about the series. And it almost doesn't feel like there's any fresh air in the conversation. Like I would like to hear people, I prefer if they like the book, obviously, but like, I would love to hear a different take on, for instance, Karsa, right? Like that would be a great discussion to have. And to your point, Jordan, we're talking about how does fantasy gain the respect of like the literary fiction community, yada, yada, yada. I would venture to say that we don't need to. Like, I don't necessarily know if I need the thumbs up from those people. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying that it can't be literary and whatnot, but like there does feel like this, like where there's a pressure on people who read fantasy and sci-fi to show you and demonstrate, hey, we actually are, we're real too. But I don't even know if that should be the aim.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point, Jimmy. I guess I'm not necessarily saying that it should go through the sort of gatekeeping of academia or something like that. I guess I just want to see more Erickson and Martin and R. Scott Baker and Gene Wolfe and J.R.R. Tolkien's and Frank Herbert's. I want to see more of that in fantasy. I want fantasy
Daniel
to take itself
Abraham.
seriously.
Long Price Quartet. That I would.
The only way to see more of that is for publishers to buy it, and they don't want to buy it because
I was about to say the publisher
won't
wants
sell.
another Sarah J. Maas.
Yeah.
They want another Colleen Hoover.
Yeah.
Which is a problem. That is certainly a problem.
That's it. That's my point, I guess.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, we have a short-term problem in this country, especially where we need results now. And we talked about this in our pacing video where a lot of people, I mean, that's why, publishers or agents, when you look at that stuff, will tell you got to make that, you got to have from the first page, you got to grab them from the first page. And that usually means, oh, I'm in the middle of an action scene, blah, blah, blah. And because, readers aren't patient or need results now. Publishers need results now. Everyone needs results now. So,
but I don't want us to set up like a false dichotomy here either. I mean, there's the fact of the matter is you have lots of great stories that do all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Malazan was just an example, but I just mentioned Long Price Quartet. There's some great psychological tension in there and some action. There is a battle in one of the books.
There is.
So
one of the books has action in it. You're right.
I mean, I really think it's fine to have both in the same book, and that's actually kind of. I was just talking to AP actually on his channel. Slightly different conversation, but I think it's similar. And the fact of the matter is, I think that great storytellers who are real students of the craft of writing can produce just these wonderful, stories that give us all this. And not that every story has to do all of it either. It's okay if somebody writes a book that is really meant to be just really entertaining. And sometimes I'm in the mood for that myself, and that's okay.
Look at Blood Meridian. Blood Meridian, the people who do not like it, and from the critic side, they say it is all for show. It's edgy. It's trying to get a visceral reaction out of you. It's almost trying too hard. Whereas I completely disagree. I think that you can have, overt violence and action. There's a lot of action in that book, and it's all miserably terrible. But you can still pack a very strong message in there as well. So yeah.
So I have a question actually, because I did watch your discussion with your nemesis, Philip, and I did see some parallels to what you two were talking about and what we were talking about in our pacing discussion. Alan was talking about how we tend to like infantilize. Is that the word you used, Alan?
Teenagers. We infantilize teenagers in education. What context was I using it?
I think you were saying this in the context of publishing and how a lot of publishers pressure, or I think our discussion was about how there's a lot of publishing pressure to be repetitive, for example, in fantasy books. And that we were talking about not really needing that as readers, just wanting to have a little bit more trust in us as readers. But you and AP talked about that, and you were putting the blame on, or he was putting the blame on authors, I think. But I was curious, is that pressure from the publisher, or is that more the author? And if anybody has insight about that.
I think it's a lot of perception. And so if authors are doing it feeling under pressure, they're doing it because they feel like either the publishers want that or the readers want that. And if the publishers are asking, and I have no knowledge whether or not publishers actually say to authors, hey, can you dumb this down a little and make this more fast paced because that's what our readers want. I have no idea if that conversation ever actually happens. But maybe it does. Maybe it does. I don't know. Yeah. I do think that we are talking about something that's been going on for a very long time. If you go look in the 19th century at what some of the most famous works of the day were, you won't know what they are because they're gone. Nobody reads them anymore because they were ephemeral and they were entertaining for their time. But, and then stuff that we read today, some of it was not really well known in its time. But critics and academics have said, hey, this is a story that is worth passing on to the next generation. And sometimes even bringing something from complete obscurity. So I don't know. It's been going on a long time. The fact of the matter is that people worrying about, are we actually telling stories that are, is this something new? In other words, I don't think it's something new, at least.
And there's been infighting in the genre about what it should be for decades. I mean, Philip, we just talked about epic poo. I mean, Moorcock hated the genre. He thought Tolkien was doing it, a disservice. Not really even Tolkien, but people who were copying that format and that approach to fantasy. And he was saying, look at all these people I've employed to this magazine. They're great. But, there's been infighting for forever.
Yeah. I asked Christopher Rocchio when he was on my channel at one point, do you think that Gene Wolfe could get published today? And he said yes, and that is optimistic, and I appreciate that, but I say no. I don't even think the editors recognize what's actually there deep down, and so I guess that's one of my worries. I'll be the cynic today. I'll be the grumpy, curmudgeonly one today, guys.
So here's a question for you, because you read a lot of literary fiction, right? Like contemporary fiction.
I read more fantasy and sci-fi now, but that was my journey. Yeah, I was, weaned on literary fiction. Yeah, classics.
So I'm sure, we all hear this all the time, but like new fantasy is just not as good as the stuff of old, right? And I might fall into that camp every now and then. But is that the same attitude that happens in contemporary fiction? Like, do they say, all these new Nebula winners are garbage compared to what we had back in the day? Like, is there that bias as well there?
Oh, I think it's interesting. I don't know. I think in fantasy and sci-fi, I think what's interesting is that I think some of the best stuff that we've had has been the 90s through today. And I think a lot of the stuff that was being published in like the 70s and the 80s was kind of, that Tolkien clone, sort of Terry Brooks, Terry Goodkind, all of the Terrys.
Terry Pratchett's an exception, though, I think.
But I kind of like new wave sci-fi, and I like a lot of what was happening in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, and then in the mid-century with Tolkien. And so I don't know. I think we're in almost, I guess, a renaissance. But I feel like the really, really good stuff has kind of slipped through the cracks. The R. Scott Bakers. If you actually read about some of the stories of how these things have gotten published, we're actually really lucky to have things like Malazan and to have R. Scott Baker's book, and that sort of thing. No, I don't think there's the same attitude in contemporary fiction, Jimmy. But it certainly is interesting. I wanted to raise a question to all of you guys that I don't know how I would answer this, but what is it that you ultimately want in a fantasy or sci-fi novel? What are the qualities that you need it to have in order for you to consider it great, or in order for you to consider it a favorite? What are some non-negotiables? What makes a fantasy or sci-fi book a 5-star read for you? Philip, why don't we start with you?
Oh, Alan's about to say I don't do stars.
I could answer
stars.
I feel like I could answer that for you guys more than me, which is weird.
What are you yearning for? What are you hungering for?
Go ahead, Jimmy. Answer it for us.
Alan is justice. That's easy.
Alan wants justice.
That is one of them. That's one of them. That's true.
I'm in the ballpark. Yeah. Philip, there's got to be themes. Like he needs something to really dig into there. And then Johanna just wants just pure smut.
How dare you reveal me?
Go ahead, Philip.
Who knew that's what assassin elves were reading?
Oh man, I think we lost Alan.
I will say, Jordan, just I'll answer your question too, but I wanted to include the fact that I was working with an agent, wonderful agent, before I ultimately decided to go the self-publishing route. And we had a conversation once about Tolkien and the fact that he was very sure that if Tolkien had been writing today, he would not be published. So, I mean, and a lot of people would not consider Lord of the Rings necessarily the most literary fantasy either. But it's just because too much description, too much, the language would have to be dumbed down, you know, several factors. So I find that very kind of ironic in a way. But what? Sorry, Johanna, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that I was actually saying in a video recently about like Cormac McCarthy. I think I'm just so grateful, even though I'm so sad that he passed away. I'm just so grateful that the literary world acknowledged him before he passed away. Because I think that's
Unlike
amazing.
John Williams. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
John
Williams
Williams
never got his day. Sad.
Yeah.
So allow me to come from the rabble meeting that I was just at. I just went and communed with my fellow plebeians. I think it's dangerous to place value judgment on books, saying that these books are inherently better than these other books because they have this thing. Like I'm with you in that I don't there is a push for faster pace right up front. There is a push for dropping you in an action scene right now. There is a push for books that don't take their time to get to their point. There is a push there, but that doesn't mean that they're bad. There are many books like that are very good. And so I just want everybody watching to understand that even if Jimmy and Philip and Johanna are elitist, aristocratic snobs, there is at least one person who understands that not every book has to be boring for 400 pages. Like, there are books that can be good maybe after 100 pages. You know what I mean? So, sure. And again, I'm being flippant, but I think I just think, and no one means that. I know that no one here is saying that, but I think sometimes we get focused on the point we're trying to make, that it can sound like we're saying that. And I want to put the caveat there.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that, because I felt like maybe that could have been misconstrued even in our pacing discussion, because we were talking about in medias res almost like a bad thing. I love Gardens of the Moon. What does that have in medias res? I love Dune.
The Odyssey,
Dune
the Iliad, and the Aeneid. All three start in medias res.
Yeah, it's a Greek thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, like, to answer your question, Jordan, one thing I always say is that I feel like the best authors can prove me wrong about almost anything I think I don't like. So it's really hard to pinpoint what it is that's like a deal breaker. I don't even think there is one. I feel like if it's a brilliant writer, they can convince me. I think usually when I think of some of my favorite reads, though, like if I think of Dune and Malazan and even Baker and Long Price Quartet, which I just started and I'm loving so far so much. And also the discussion I just had with Jimmy the other day about, we were talking about A Storm of Swords, a chapter in A Storm of Swords. And I think, like, one thing I could say is that I really love is when we get like a micro, and when you can appreciate something on a micro level and a macro level, when it can make you zoom in and appreciate just the finest little detail of whatever, I mean, and then zoom out and love it on this whole other epic scale. So I think I love both of those type of elements in a story.
Some people even appreciate Dwerg funerals.
Who is that? Who is that? I don't know if it's anybody here.
I'm going to take a cop-out answer to this question, Jordan, and I'm going to say the human heart in conflict with itself. That's all I want. Literally, that's all I want. It could happen with lasers, or it could happen.
The Faulkner.
Faulkner. I was going to say Solzhenitsyn, but yeah, definitely Faulkner. That's right. Yeah, I guess I kind of agree with, especially you, Alan. I mean, yeah, like I remember once AP said, and I've never spoken with AP, but I've just watched some of his videos with with you, Philip. He said sometimes you just want a cheeseburger. I guess as like a philosopher, I just want to make sure that we know it's a cheeseburger. I'm an aesthetic realist. I do think we can make logical, reason-based, evaluative judgments about aesthetic objects. I do think we can say that some things are better and some things are worse. I do think we can make value judgments, but I think everyone needs a cheeseburger sometimes.
Are you a philosopher?
Well, yeah, I majored in philosophy and I teach philosophy at a charter school.
That's awesome.
So I guess I could call myself a philosopher.
That's fascinating.
Feels very Greek, though.
Hold on, at a high school, charter school?
Yeah.
They let you teach philosophy in high school?
Yeah.
They should require logic in high school.
Good for you. That's
I think
awesome.
they do in Canada. I think they make the kids have to take at least one. But yeah, I teach philosophy there. I teach 2 sections of, it's like an intro to philosophy. So we start with the pre-Socratic philosophers. We do Socrates. Well, he didn't write anything. So Plato. We do the dialogues, then we do the Republic, and then we do Aristotle. Then we do ethics. So like utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, that sort of thing.
I barely talk about. I talk about Socrates. I make them read Euthyphro, Crito. I hate Phaedo, and Apology.
Yeah. Those are the ones I do. I don't do the Phaedo either, and
hate it.
Screw it.
The theory of forms can go sit on it and rotate.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And it's awesome watching high schoolers watch their brain explode with the Euthyphro dilemma.
Oh, yeah.
Is it beloved because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it's beloved?
Right.
Love it. Boom.
And I think given what we're talking about, Alan, I think that's really relevant because Plato's fundamental question is a thing good? Are things good because God says they're good? Are they right or wrong, good or bad because God says they are? Or is there some innate goodness or badness or right or wrong or evil or justice in the world that God recognizes because God is all powerful, all knowing, and all good? And so because God is so smart, does he recognize that the things that are good are actually good? Or does God make things good? Yeah. And so both perspectives provide us kind of with a problem, right? Because one perspective is kind of dangerous because if God makes things good, then that implies that God can make anything good, like murder or rape, right? And if things are inherently good and then God just admits that they are so already, that means that there's a standard higher than God that God actually has to bow down to. So it's a very thought-provoking, and you can actually extend the argument to aesthetics as well. Is a work of literature like Shakespeare inherently good, or is it just good because we say that it's good? So that would be aesthetic relativism.
Is Toll the Hounds good in and of itself,
right?
Or is it only good because Erickson and Philip and AP say it's good?
Why haven't we talked before, Alan? What's going on?
That's the question of the ages. So old Plato needs to write himself a dialogue about that. The Toll the Hounds dilemma.
So we need to, I think we really should be unpacking the word good here because we're throwing this word around a lot. And I think the problem is a lot of different things can be good depending. For me, if I'm in the mood for an entertaining read that is going to let the time go by when I'm sitting on the bus or something, and I don't want to get something that's going to require too much of my thought, I just want to pass the time. Is Shakespeare's Hamlet going to be good? Probably not. If I am trying to pass my time that way, is a Dresden Files book going to be good? Yeah. Now, am I saying that Dresden Files is better than Shakespeare? No, I'm not. But for that particular purpose, it is better. Yeah. If I want to read something that is going to really challenge me and make me question and give me insight and help me to explore important things like love and loss and beauty and all that sorrow, then I want to read Toll the Hounds.
I thought you were about to plug your own book.
Did not include Toll the Hounds in the entertaining section. Like he did not put Toll the Hounds in I want to read something entertaining.
Well, I will say this, and to Alan's point, Leo Tolstoy was a big proponent of you cannot lose the story and theme or meaning or any of that. First, like the story has to be there, and you have to have something that is still like thought-provoking and entertaining, which I think is kind of interesting because Stephen King's also that way. He says story comes first, even before anything. He's like the story is all that matters.
For him.
So yeah, for him. Yeah. And obviously, you know, it depends on who you are. But I did think it was interesting hearing someone that like Leo Tolstoy, who wrote in 1861, that he was like, yeah, you guys need to start focusing on the plot. Dostoevsky's trash. And I was like, whoa, that's wild. That's not a popular opinion.
Also, I like Toll the Hounds. Like, I don't hate that book. Like, let's like
I legit thought you despised it. I'm not
no, it's my least favorite of the book. Hold on. So David, what David's saying is I agree. I'm not saying that all books are equal. I'm not being like, that's not what I'm doing. I'm not like putting parity across the board. I'm just saying that we can have a tendency to lump too many things into that, to where we are the sole arbiter, and really no one besides me should be doing that. Everyone can't be the sole arbiter of quality, so we can't like lump every book by this person as inferior to it just becomes a thing to where there are good books and then there are bad books, and the bad books are the ones that I don't like, regardless of anything else, and that's not really what it is. We include Descartes. You know whose meditations we can't include? Marcus Aurelius. If someone talks about Marcus Aurelius, I'm going to hit this leave studio button.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I especially agree that there shouldn't be some ultimate arbiter that decides, with a hammer, what is and what isn't literary quality and that sort of thing. I suppose I would just say I'm not a moral relativist and I'm not an aesthetic relativist. So, in philosophy, we have different kinds of truths. You have a priori truths that are true prior to experience. You have a posteriori truths that are true via experience, empiricism. And then you have anthropocentric truths. Those are truths that are true because of the kinds of creatures we are and the ways we interact with one another. And I think that I think the term subjective gets abused. If you major in philosophy, you will use the term subjective in one way. If you take an aesthetics course or an ethics course, you'll use the term subjective in one way. And then there's the way that everyone else uses it, which is basically that everything except math is subjective. No, I do think that we can use our reason. I mean, there's no teacher in their right mind who doesn't believe that. The idea that you can't make a rubric and then judge students according to your rubric, like what is a more effective essay versus a less effective essay. But to Alan's point and to Philip's point, that doesn't mean that you can just rank order these things from on high. Like, I'll give you an example. So restaurants, sometimes you're in the mood for Mexican. And then you can ask the question, what is the best Mexican restaurant in the city that I live in? And that might be the one that I go to. And you can use evaluative criteria like, what is the Mexican restaurant with the best service, with the freshest ingredients, with, the cleanest environment, with the most inspired menu, whatever it is. But the idea that we have all of these people leaving like extremely judgmental, like Yelp reviews about everything, and yet they're also like aesthetic relativists at the end of the day, to me is hypocrisy and is ridiculous. So I do think we can make aesthetic judgments that are reason-based, but I do think we have to be careful, like you said, and we have to make distinctions, and we can establish criteria for doing that. But I'm not willing to give that up just yet.
I don't think I've ever
explain aesthetic relativist to me. I'm sorry.
An aesthetic relativist would be someone who thinks, when it comes to, say, I don't know, wines, there's no such thing as a better or worse wine. And all I'm arguing for is not that, in this like a priori fashion, there are some wines that are better than other wines. What I'm arguing is for anthropocentric truth, the idea that we have a human nature, we're constructed in a certain way, we have a certain kind of palate. I don't mean that everyone's palate is the same, but phylogenetically, right? Like the type of creature that we are prefers certain things versus other things, right? Stale bread tastes worse to humans in general than fresh bread does. Humans tend to prefer fresh bread. And so fresh bread is always going to appeal to humans more than stale bread. And you might find one wacko whose palate is constructed other than ours is, But I'm saying, so it's relative to humans, and that's the only thing it's relative to. That would be my definition of anthropocentric, meaning if there's such a thing as greatness in literature, it's not entirely relative. It's relative to us. For example, if I put you in a movie theater, Johanna, and I had you watch a movie and I'm just I'm on the screen just whacking out like this for 2 hours. And then I bring you in and have you watch A New Hope. You're going to, and 99.9% of people are going to enjoy New Hope. And it's not arbitrary why everyone's going to enjoy New Hope more than me whacking out. It's because there are features and elements and archetypes in those films that are actually calibrated and designed to speak to our nature as human beings. I mean, does that make sense?
I'd probably want to watch like Martin Lawrence's Run Tell Dat again before I watch someone freak out for two hours on screen.
Yeah.
And Martin Lawrence's Run Tell Dat is one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
I've never seen it.
I had to watch it. I worked at the movie theater, so I had to watch all the ones because I built the film, so I had to watch it to make sure I hadn't built it wrong. It was bad.
That's wild.
Man.
There's also about how something is executed, based on what it's trying to execute, right? Like a random mystery novel might not ever make it into the Western literary canon, but it might be the greatest mystery ever written.
Are you using the words authorial intent right now, Jimmy? Is that what you're doing?
Is that what I'm doing? I don't know. I don't use those.
It sounds like you're saying. It sounds like you're saying authorial intent.
Is that a bad thing?
I didn't say it was. What is your problem?
I don't know. I felt like you were trying to bait me into a trap.
It did sound that way.
A little bit.
No, I think that I think what we're another thing that's coming to mind in addition to that is I know, Philip, you talk a lot about themes, and I think we all like themes, even though Alan says he doesn't. He loves themes. He
loves themes.
Of course, I love themes. I don't.
Themes of justice.
But the reason I bring that up is because I think that that's the power of theme. Theme is what transcends the story that's universal to the human condition. And
everyone likes themes.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we can all identify with. And it's the reason why, for example, I keep on preaching about Stoner by John Williams, why so many people, despite their background in reading, despite the fact that many of us are more into fantasy reading than literary fiction reading or whatever genre it is, find something in Stoner that we really love, that speaks to us. Speaks
Which
to our
was
soul
considered
somehow.
trash, by the way.
But here's the thing. If I'd have read Stoner when I was in my 20s, I'd have hated it. I would have hated Stoner in my 20s. And that doesn't mean the book's gotten any worse or the book's gotten any better. Like, I was not a person who could appreciate Stoner like what Stoner does when I was in my 20s. And so that doesn't make, someone who doesn't like Stoner, it doesn't make them some kind of like, it doesn't mean they're part of the rabble. And, while we sit in our salon and, and dictate, how much bread we're not going to give the plebs later.
Wait, is that stale bread or fresh bread?
Oh, they get stale bread if they get anything at all. But it's just so hard. I love academic discussions. I do. But when we talk about it, I worry that I don't want people to think that you have to know academic terminology to talk about books. Like, you don't have to know what exegesis and, what a heteroclite is. Hey, any of y'all know what a heteroclite is? Nope. Boom. I just Latin trumped y'all. I mean, it's like, you don't have to know what this stuff is to talk about it. So I don't want you guys, anybody, to hear an academic discussion and be like, well, I guess I can never talk about books because I don't know the stuff that they know. No, that's dumb. Like, go talk about books. Say you thought it was awesome. Like, go watch me talk about a freaking book, and you'll wonder why anyone gave this guy a platform, because I can't say anything other than it was really good. That's so good. It was so awesome. And then the guy comes in and I don't know what that crap is. This is the only way I know how to talk about things.
Alan, that's not true. That's actually not true. You do plenty of literary analysis. And
he is right though. I think he's right about himself, but he's a good communicator. And there's a large gap between knowing the technical terms, which it can be very, very important.
They're
and
just
then being able to
tools. They're
communicate
just
it, right?
tools. Those
Yeah,
No, I
that's-
totally agree with this because
So-
I mean, as a music teacher, if I have a student who comes to me and they're trying to describe their experience listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony the first time, and maybe they misuse the word legato, or they don't know the right term, they don't know what allegro means, I'm not going to shame them for that. I'm going to be excited that they want to engage with Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and have a conversation with me about it.
Sure.
And so-
yeah. And yes, and what Philip's saying is I do literary analysis. I just don't use the same terminology with literary analysis that like I sometimes like I don't know the term sometimes. I just forget it. Like I went to college, I'm educated, whatever. Like
I didn't.
some of the terminology that Jordan was using talking about philosophy. I'm like, it has been a hot minute since I heard that freaking terminology. But I mean, it's like it doesn't matter. Like talking about that, if you know that, using that, there's nothing wrong with using that terminology. But then saying that, like, if someone didn't know what aesthetic relativism was or moral relativism, which I talk about way more often, moral relativism. If someone didn't know what that was, it doesn't mean someone can't talk about those things. They just don't have a name for it. And this is, and it's hard because I'm a language snob. Like I'm a word snob. Through is THROUGH. It's not THRU, but language is for communication. So when you say something and it's not perfectly grammatically correct, or you're using like shorthand and someone understands you, and then someone comes behind you's like, well, you didn't use like, it's like, so shut up. The person I was talking to, which isn't you, by the way, understood what I meant. So, and it sucks because I'm on the side of the snob. I don't want language to change. Learn how to spell. Don't change it because you can't spell. Learn how to spell. But at the same time, like I do understand that the purpose of communication, even though I hate it, even though, hey, dude, bruh, that's fire. Yas, queen. Oh, that guy's got Riz. Like, what are you saying, you troglodyte? But like, they understand it. They understand the nonsense they spout. So I don't know. I don't know if any of that made any sense, but that's what but language, I don't know. Language about communication. And
yeah, I agree, Alan. That's why, like in class, I have to teach grammar because I'm an English and philosophy teacher. I do, and I think you'd appreciate this, Philip. I teach some prescriptive things. So I have a prescriptive approach to grammar when it concerns like the logic of a sentence, right? If it's affecting the semantic content of the sentence. But I do take a descriptive approach most of the time. And for exactly the reason that you're talking about, language evolves and stuff like that. I'll answer this one really quickly, David. No, and that's exactly why I'm not a moral relativist either. If 99.9% of the country thought that slavery was good, the fact that they think that's the case doesn't make it the case. They're all wrong if they think that. So I feel the same way about art as well. You can make wrong judgments about it, but that's my take. I know that I have a weird kind of theory on that. I have another question for you guys that I hope you're able to engage with. I'm interested in what you guys said about what you like to see in fantasy literature. I assume that you guys all like to see, whether it's Martin or Erickson, you guys like to see a world of nuance and complexity. And so I imagine that you like to see morally gray characters. And in fact, I think the reason that I interact with a lot of your channels is because you review works that have a lot of morally gray characters. I know that's true of you, Jimmy, and all of you. Where do you stand on that issue? Because some people say, yeah, I don't like this book because there are no good people in it, or there's no one I'd want to go have a beer with, which unfortunately is the way a lot of people pick their president as well. I don't want to have a beer with that person. And for me, there's a big difference in literature between a good character and a likable one. When you read George R. R. Martin, you may not really like Sansa. If you knew her in real life, you'd probably think she was annoying, or Theon or Jaime or Catelyn for that matter. You might not want to go out to dinner with these characters. You might not approve of the decisions they make, but you care what happens to them. You want to be inside their heads, and they're well-rounded characters that make up a well-rounded world. What's your philosophy on characters? What makes them likable? What kind of characters you want to see, and that sort of thing? Who wants to go?
I'll
start
go last because I have a bunch to
I
say.
think, let me ask a question. Does a character
Socrates
have to be psychologically developed to be a good character or a compelling character? I would say no. There are plenty of flat characters.
He's going to talk about Lord of the Rings.
In literature, I like to talk about William Faulkner. Go read his short story, A Rose for Emily. There is not a single
you don't have to
psychologically developed character in that story. They're all flat characters, but they are vivid. They're interesting. They're compelling. They're archetypal. They're symbolic. So does it to say that all characters have to be morally gray to be good, I think is very mistaken. I would strongly disagree with that. Sometimes a flat but vivid villain can be really interesting, or a hero as well. I mean, there's so many different things you can do with characters. Why limit yourself to one kind of thing when there's just an array of things you can do? You can have wonderful psychologically developed characters. You can have wonderful flat characters and all kinds of things in between. So that's my response to the question.
Do you know my favorite flat character? It's in A Song of Ice and Fire. Make him fly. Make him fly.
Lord Rob.
I mean, he's very flat.
He's very flat, but he's very funny. I love reading him on the page.
Yeah.
And he adds a lot to the story.
Yep.
He adds a lot of contrast to the other characters around him.
Dickens wrote almost exclusively flat characters. And he's a great, yeah.
Dickens sucks.
Characters are a hard one. I don't know.
No, I am not a Lomax sympathizer. Sorry, I just saw that. I hate Lomax. Get over yourself.
I think I prefer nuanced characters because it almost always is a good idea to look at the other person's perspective, and that's what it usually offers. I have found the biggest lesson I've learned in the last 8 years is that most people think what they're doing is right. Most people think they have the best of intentions, and that is an extremely hard thing to do sometimes. And I actually do think that reading nuanced characters has actually made me better at that in real life. So that is like a tangible thing that I feel like I've improved on. But I agree with Philip. And I actually think that one of the reasons, like, when you talk about great characters, people think of like Abercrombie, where like none of these characters are enjoyable, or, I can't root for them. But I actually think that sometimes, and maybe this is the case for a lot more people, is that the nuanced character gives the comfort to someone that there is no such thing as just flat evil. Everyone has a nuanced reason for what they're doing, but I don't believe that to be true. I don't think that's the world we live in. I think there are truly terrible human beings that are evil. I think the Night Stalker was an evil person. I think Ted Bundy was an evil person. I don't see his perspective. I just don't. Bidafal would be an example. I don't see his perspective. And I know we've talked about whether he deserves sympathy. I don't think so. I think he's evil.
He doesn't.
For me, that line is there. So I think nuanced characters make people feel comfortable that maybe like true evil isn't out there. But I think it is. And I think it's a dangerous thing to ignore.
Thanks, honey. Mm-hmm. So morally gray characters. Sorry, my wife literally just brought in food as we hold on. Never mind. What's the problem?
I'll go ahead and answer then. I've been trying to think about this question a lot lately. Something that I came across recently was this idea. It was actually on a YouTube channel that focuses on writing, because I love to learn about writing, not because I'm an aspiring writer. I'm not. I just love to learn about the craft because I love to learn about how authors influence me psychologically with whatever techniques they use. And this one particular YouTuber I'm not saying that her approach is the right way by any means, but she was really big about like start with character when you write a story or fantasy story, and start with them having a misbelief about the world. And whatever that misbelief is, that's going to be their revelation. And that revelation is going to paint the way for your theme in the story. And that's going to take them on the journey to paint the plot. So it's like character misbelief first into plot and into theme. And she had this whole entire structure down. It was really interesting. But it did get me thinking a lot about how some of my favorite characters, some of my favorite character journeys anyway, happen when a character is operating on a certain misbelief about the world. Like Pete Nazy is a great example of that. That's a character who has a totally different belief about the world than how it actually is. But following that journey was so amazing, seeing how he actually constructs his own meaning out of the world and how those revelations change him through that journey without giving away too much. Or seeing like Fitz chivalry and how Fitz is operating on this certain belief based on his childhood about how he needs to be in the world and how he needs to operate with people and how he has to make certain sacrifices because that's what he has to do to be good or to do well. And so certain characters operating on these like beliefs and whether or not they're right or wrong, usually they're wrong, but like just seeing them grapple with that or having conflicting values is also something that I find interesting. So like in the Long Price Quartet, which I just read the first book of, there's a character in there I really connected with. There were actually I connected with every character, but there's one particular character I'm thinking about who has this conflict between valuing freedom and valuing integrity. And those two things seem to align with one another in the beginning of his journey. And then he gets to a point in his life where they totally do not align with each other. And there's another character who is grappling with loyalty, feeling like he's loyal, and then later struggling with betrayal and having to choose. And just seeing them having conflicting choices between their core beliefs or their core misbeliefs and what they align with as far as their identity and their virtues. So I don't know. I just love those explorations. But I think that Jimmy, you probably said it best earlier about a character in conflict with the human heart. Is that how you put it? Because I loved that.
Heart in conflict with itself.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautifully said. That was perfect.
Well, I didn't say it, so.
Oh, well, it's perfect. I love that line. I'm going to have to write that down because I think that speaks to what I loved about the Long Price Quartet or what I love about a lot of different stories.
That's the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire. It's the whole thing.
Yes. And those characters are all operating off misbeliefs. All of them. All of them have blind spots. And you as a reader see them.
Cersei especially.
Yes. Yes.
She's so tough.
My issue with morally gray characters is the same issue I have all the time, and it's the overuse of a word or phrase to where it no longer means anything. We pick up these words and I don't know if it's just because I'm on the spectrum and so pattern recognition, like when I read something and I'm like, why does Pierce Brown use latifundia so much? Why does Pierce Brown love truculent and latifundia? He uses those two words. They're not common words. Why do you use these two words so often? And so I hear people say morally gray all the time, and it becomes meaningless. It morally gray just means like, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And it comes to mean, when people say morally gray, what they mean is like what Jimmy said. They mean grimdark-ish. They mean like Abercrombie. They mean scummy people. That's what morally gray now means when you see it in Orbit's, because I'm a big fan of the verbiage that Orbit has decided it's going to use in its Instagram pushes of these new works that it's collected. When you say morally gray, that means scummy people. When literally everyone has morally gray decisions sometimes. Even really good people sometimes make mistakes. And that means that there is a shade to them. Like the morally non-morally gray people are like the paladins from 2nd edition D&D who literally cannot lie or bypass any kind of thing, or else they lose the blessing of their god, like these paragons of virtue. Most people do things that they're not proud of. Most people, and that's one of the reasons I like Long Price Quartet, is just they're people. Like, you know, like Jimmy said, most people think they're good people. I mean, they're wrong. Like most people are wrong. The person stealing millions of dollars from a bunch of people's retirement accounts is not a good person. Like, so when we talk about books, and especially on the internet and social media, we just seize on these buzzwords and we use them over and over. And it's fine. Again, a language about communication. So the problem is when people come in and get mad that people are using morally gray wrong. It's like, no, you just have to understand what people mean when they're saying that. And if you don't mean that, you have to clarify that you don't mean that. Like if you say morally gray and you're talking about Long Price Quartet, people are thinking that it's Glockta or, Jazal or these huge douchebags. And Ota and Mati aren't comparable to those guys. So, but that's what people think. Like, again, that's what most people think. Especially if you're in just.
Well, and that's why I invited that pacing discussion on my channel, because I feel like a lot of times when we hear the word pacing, people use these words in very general ways. And I think it's fine to use those words. I just would I personally would prefer in videos for reviewers, and myself included, I can be called out sometimes, to unpack these things, to explain these things. What do you mean when you say that this was slow paced? Where is the story focusing on in those moments where you're feeling it's slow? Or what is it doing when you feel it's fast? I just want the discussion to, if you're going to say a character is morally gray, great, but unpack that. Like, what do you mean by the character is morally gray?
I am in favor of people not using buzzwords. Like I can tell, I know what news station you watch based on how you talk about politics, because you will either use buzzwords or phrases that you heard on this site, or you will use buzzwords or phrases that you heard on this site. And it's always in the exact same verbiage. And that's how you know. And that's how I know when people do it online. It's the exact same verbiage that I heard over here. Like, just like
I don't have a television, Alan.
Yeah, you guys are essentially, you may not realize it, you're walking through like bullet point by bullet point the central argument of Orwell's Politics in the English Language. I'm sure some of you have read that, but his argument there is that we are oftentimes unconsciously using these ready-made, tacked together phrases without understanding what those things really mean. And so as you pointed out, Alan, it's okay to use these words, but we actually have to, like Socrates, define our terms, right? So as you said, Alan, there are certain people that I speak to, and their speech is so sort of ready-made and pre-chewed and prefabricated that I can sort of hack the algorithm of their ideology, right? I actually know, given what input I deliver, I know exactly what they're going to say back to me, because their speech is being animated like I don't know, they've got like a pull string or something like that, and you pull that string and just the utterances of their ideology come spilling out in this really sad and predictable way. So yeah, I'm totally with you there. And
to use a BookTube example, like some people, and like most people are fine. I don't think any of us have had really like negative experiences with commenters. I think most people are fine. But every now and then I'll get someone who comes after me about Toll the Hounds, to bring it back there. And and they'll leave me a comment and I'm like, oh, you just watched Philip and AP talk, because what you're writing down there is literally word for word what they said in their video. Like, I watched that video too. I don't need you to make AP and Philip's point at me. They made it when I watched the video. So people,
would you say Philip Chase is dangerous?
Do what?
Would you say Philip Chase is dangerous?
I would say Philip Chase is one of the great dangers of our time.
The Way of a Dan, available on Amazon.
The Prophet of a Dan.
You got to read the first one.
With
right,
the best dangerous elves ever.
That's right. Watch out for those elves.
So here's something I wanted to run by you guys as well. So when you're thinking about which book that you're going to read next, speaking of these like Toll of the Hounds situations, these controversial book choices, which are polarizing among fans.
It's
when
only
you're thinking,
polarizing to me.
No,
just me.
I couldn't make it past Gardens of the Moon. I'm not as smart as you guys are. I think I said this during one of Philip's live streams.
It's just not your thing.
Maybe you guys could tell me, why don't we do that? Sell me on Malazan, because
Philip does it right.
I'm telling you, I'm not smart enough to read those books, and I'm not being falsely modest. I've tried multiple times, and other people breeze through it, and they just, in this sort of graceful way, are able to just plow through all of these books. And you know, I think I remember Scott once told me he listened to it on like two speed. And I'm like, I'm poring over it, and I've got like, you know, I've got a file open, and I'm making like an appendix. I'm making like a glossary of terms, and I made it through book one, and I had to call it quits. Why am I wrong?
Well, first of all, I'm going to let others. We'll tag team on this, but I do want to start by saying it is not about intelligence.
Yeah.
So it's never.
I feel defeated.
Enough. I'm not smart enough for this. It's that's not why. So actually, it's a little surprising me in a way that you bounced off it hard, but it's fine. And there's zero judgment for that. But what I would say is that Malazan tends to give people a hard time often because, or people have a hard time with it, I should say, because of expectations. And a lot of times we hear, oh, this is a great fantasy series, and we have ideas about what fantasy is and does. And when Malazan doesn't do what we expect, we're like, wait, what is this? This isn't right. Something is off here. That's the thing about Malazan, is I think you have to throw a lot of your expectations, put them aside, because when I say they, it's Erickson and Esselmont both, have a tendency to and some of it is just deliberate subversion of tropes and that sort of thing. But it's not just that. It's not that they're trying to be different or something. They both use a lot of techniques that are simply just literary techniques that are not maybe as common in fantasy, but you would find in lots of kinds of literature, generally speaking. So just a quick example, and then I'm going to let somebody else address it. In fantasy, we often expect a hero, a protagonist, or at least a group of protagonists to be at the center of everything. We're going to follow along this group for the whole thing. Malazan doesn't do that. There's no hero who's going to save the universe. And that seems like such an unfantasy thing to do. And if you're somebody who's really expecting and wanting that usual trope, you're going to be like, where's my hero? I'm confused. What's going on here? Who am I supposed to be rooting for? Malazan doesn't give you an easy.
I had no issue with that. Like, I easily picked, these are the good guys. Everyone who is opposing them.
Well, we know you love Coltane, Alan.
I love the bridge burners. I love the Empire. Sorry, are you an enemy of the Empire? You're the bad guy. You want to rebel? We're going to put it down.
You were a man of the people here all this time.
Not in books.
I am both revolutionary and tyrant, Philip. This is the struggle I have. This is the
Don't forget that Marcus Aurelius was an emperor.
Marcus Aurelius is awful. Marcus Aurelius is the most overrated freaking emperor ever, quoted by dude bros who read his journal on Facebook. Meditations wasn't a treatise on philosophy. It was his freaking journal. And we've turned it into something for people with beards to talk about carry your
sorry,
I don't know,
sorry,
your woman to bed over the shoulder like a Viking. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Marcus Aurelius doesn't know what a Viking is.
Anyway.
Sorry.
So I do think, Jordan, that Malazan is a wonderful series if you're ready to roll with the fact that it's not going to immediately or maybe ever meet your expectations. Just being a little open, I think, a little loose and flexible, and just rolling with it, is helpful, especially the first time.
Yeah, I got plenty to say about feelings. Don't feel stupid. It's just not your thing. Like, the stuff that's being used, it just isn't your thing. Malazan, it's the social media sphere that we live in. Malazan has, and it's because people like, and there's nothing wrong with what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm not indicting Philip right here, but because Philip and AP and people like they talk about Malazan all the time, right? And Philip's a popular booktuber, in our sphere. Like, most people know who Philip is, and because of the way they talk about it in such an intelligent way that it becomes known as this really intellectual academic series, and it has that mythos surrounding it. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just the fact that this is in this section of BookTube, it gets that reputation just because of the way it's talked about.
But I like this section of BookTube, and I feel left out because everyone seems to just everyone. And Philip makes so many videos about this, and those are the only videos of Philip's that I can't watch.
I mean, like everyone thinks Brandon Sanderson is really, really good. And I don't understand why he needs to tell me about metal that many times. It's like, bro, like, and also, how on earth could the comedy in the introduction of Shallan have gotten past an editor? How could any editor not see that and be like, this is the most cringy thing I have ever read in my life? And so I'm on the outside too. Don't worry about it. Like, but there are many things that have really good themes of justice. So Crime and Punishment is a Dostoevsky, land your plane, bro. Like, land your plane. I get that you're depressed, but stop. Like, I don't like Dostoevsky, and I've read it, but I don't enjoy it, even though there are some themes in there that I normally really connect with. I love the movie Oliver Twist, and I hate everything Dickens has ever written except maybe Tale of Two Cities. Do you know what I love? Moby Dick, because it's about 18th century whaling, and everyone else hates it.
But you're making us sad. Like, Jimmy, you insulted Jimmy's Russian literature, whereas I'm here. Crime and Punishment to me is one of the most gripping page turners of the 19th century. It is a psychological thriller that pits a would-be 19th century great man theorist Ubermensch against the hard realities of the moral universe. And you're over here. It's terrible. And
no, that's not what I said.
Author of all time is Dickens. You make me want to weep because you're so smart, Alan. And I just wish we agreed on this.
No. Dickens is a money-grubbing hack who was paid by the word, and every single thing he ever wrote shows that. Hey, Dickens, you don't need 30 words to say Oliver walked across the street, bro, Cephas. Anyway,
I kind of agree with you on Oliver Twist, but Great Expectations.
Great Expectations is the worst book that has ever been written. second only to James Joyce's Ulysses, which is a war crime.
You're hurting my heart.
James Joyce's Ulysses is inexcusable.
I agree on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we agree on that.
But does it have smut?
My feelings are actually hurt, and that is
Great Expectations is terrible, Jordan. I had great expectations going into that book, and he let me down.
There's a pain in my chest right now. That's like my favorite
Dickens
novel.
for writing a terrible book.
And Jordan, what did you think about Virginia Woolf saying that Dostoevsky writes books where characters are just screaming out their intrinsic thoughts at each other in a small room?
Is she talking about the scene with the detective Porphyry and Raskolnikov?
She said all of his books.
Just that one?
She was not a fan. She thought he was garbage.
Or is she talking about Notes from the Underground? I'm a sick man. I'm a spiteful man. No, actually, I taught Virginia Woolf's. Mrs.
Dalloway.
No.
Waves. The Waves.
What's that?
The Waves.
No.
Miss Bourne.
No, it's her. It's her most famous work. I cannot believe I'm forgetting the title.
Rush Hour.
A Room of One's Own. I taught that this year, and so I have a deep respect for Virginia Woolf. I think she captures the anxieties and the angst of that post World War I generation better than maybe any other author. But
I don't like her either.
She's wrong about Dostoevsky. So
it's an ironic comment from Virginia Woolf, considering she's like Miss Stream of Consciousness too. You know.
Oh, really?
She just hated his dialogue.
Brilliant.
I think you know what it was. I think it was whenever Brothers released is whenever she put that out. I think that's
thanks.
The
Kevin.
point is that I wish I could hang out in the salon with you and Descartes and all of the other like people who love really long-winded classic literature, and I just don't. But I wish I was part of that crew. And so when I was in college, this made me feel stupid because I took a bunch of classes, and I'm sorry, I don't want to read William James. William James is a snooze fest. Like,
wait, Alan, I do think there might be a little bit of irony in this because you're the guy who loves KJ Parker, and Abraham's Long Price Quartet.
The irony is that all the pretentious people who like boring books won't read Long Price Quartet and KJ Parker. That's the irony, because
I read them. I read LPQ.
Yeah, me too.
Well,
I'm reading LPQ finally.
Then I'm not talking about y'all. And Jimmy, you're not one of the pretentious people.
Okay, good. By the way, I think you.
Oh wait, how come I'm not one of the pretentious?
Oh, Johanna,
you haven't read it yet, Johanna.
But I'm reading Long Price Quartet.
Reading is present progressive and not past.
Dang it.
Alan, you would like Leo Tolstoy short
Don't
stories.
tell me what I'd like.
They're very
Alan.
KJ Parker-esque, honestly.
Well, I'm afraid that Alan's going to hurt my feelings again. So, Jimmy, I just want to recommend the short stories of Thomas Mann to you. If you like, if you like Russian literature and you're enjoying the like the sort of the Gogol and the Tolstoy and the Dostoevsky, I think you'd actually like Thomas Mann. So I'm going to make that suggestion to you. I don't want Alan to hurt my feelings because he just hurt my feelings so many times.
Look, I just finished watching the HBO show Chernobyl. I'm mad at the Russians right now. I need them to get over it and freaking save some people's lives and stop worrying about how they're going to look.
Yeah.
Get over it, Soviet Russia.
What a great show. My God.
Fantastic, Jimmy. Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's one of the best TV shows ever.
Oh, yeah.
It was
good.
phenomenal. No,
Absolutely.
I don't like a lot of classic authors. I like Henry James, Turn of the Screw, and I like Nathaniel Hawthorne.
And you legit love Moby Dick.
I do.
And
Do you know who can suck it? Thoreau, Whitman, who's the Emerson? Emerson, they can all suck it. Like, go back to
Just
Walden,
murderers,
quit publishing
bro.
stuff, Thoreau.
But you're not a transcendentalist then, Alan?
Do I strike you as a transcendentalist?
Okay, I've got another question. Moving on from that, I wanted to know if there was a book that, the way that you guys choose your books, is there a book that is rated like a 3 by the community at large that you love, but that is quite literally underrated, whether it's Goodreads or Amazon or whatever, by the public? So what is one book that you guys, maybe you could think about a book that you've read over the past couple of years that is underrated, that people don't appreciate, that has a ranking of like a 3.5 or something like that on Goodreads, but that just speaks to you, that you think is a great book? It's one of your favorite books.
Toll the Hounds.
Toll the Hounds has a 3-something on Goodreads?
I wouldn't be
I doubt
surprised.
that.
There are not nearly enough people like me that do that. Hold on, looking it up.
Okay, look it up.
Mine's
look it
R.
up.
Scott Baker.
I
R.
bet
Scott
you
Baker.
it's closer to a 3.5.
There's no way. The Malazan Bros would never let that happen.
Baker's second series literally has less than a lot of self-pub fantasy, like less ratings, and they're low. Like they're very low.
Philip, out of 31,350 ratings, Toll the Hounds has a 4.36. Don't even try. And that is with my 2 weighing it down.
That's your 2 in there?
Yes, weighing it down.
I also would throw out Grace of Kings because it seems popular in our section of BookTube, but in general, it is not. Like Dandelion Dynasty is not popular in the public at all. I think Grace of Kings has like a 3.5. Grace of Kings. Grace of Kings has like a 3.5 on Goodreads.
Like Way of Kings.
Really? How many ratings does it have?
I got you.
Decent amount.
It's
certainly more than most books, at least fantasy books. You know, a book that I gave 3 stars that was ranked 3 stars, but it's like the best 3 stars I've ever given a book is The Vagrant by Peter Newman. It's a first person present tense main character is a mute, and he's in a post-apocalyptic world where a rift is opened up in the world and there's like demons, and they have like basically are running like a fascist government. It's wild. Like it's not perfect, but it's like The Road meets The Mandalorian, and because he's carrying a baby. I forgot that. And he has a magical sword that talks and like sings and stuff. It's weird.
Oh, that's the book you were just talking about in your
wrap up. Yeah.
In your wrap up.
I gave it 3 stars, but it's like one of those things where I didn't want to agree with Goodreads because I'm like, this is better than like what most 3 stars are on Goodreads. And it's just different, which I'll go with anything that's different. Like if something's weird, I will try it because I get tired of reading the same old stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I like Baker so much.
Yeah, I think Baker would be my choice. Just I've only read The Darkness That Comes Before, but I looked it up on Goodreads and it had like a 3.8 or a 3.7 or something like that. And I just said, this is just not true. And we can talk about subjectivity and taste and all of that stuff. The literary quality, he's transcending the expectations of his genre. It reads like literature. It's brilliant. It's
biblical. It has that weight. Like
it's Nietzschean.
Really...
It's
but what about people
and Nietzschean?
What about people who don't want to read about unwashed anuses and what is it?
Well, that's why it has a 3.8 because nobody does besides like 5 of us. That is always considered the series that like went too far, but I don't know. To me, it's like awesome. I love it.
Yeah, I'm struggling to find something that is 3.5 that
shill.
I got you.
I called you a shill. I'm just kidding.
Oh, I was looking for Gwyn. I feel like a lot of people
it's a Shadow in Summer at 3.62.
Okay,
yeah,
that's a good.
I was going to say everyone should just say Daniel Abraham. Yeah,
that would be mine.
Oh, Age of Ash people hated. I got to look at that. Hold on.
So I just read A Shadow in Summer recently, and that's actually been my favorite book of the year so far.
Oh, Age of Ash is 3.68.
I just could not pull myself away from it. I fell in love with every character. I loved the themes. I loved the Japanese-inspired setting. I felt like I could taste the tea. I could imagine the bathhouses. I could love the silk robes. Everything about it just spoke to me. So that would definitely be my choice.
Nice. Is Age of Ashes Django Wexler? Is that what that is, Alan?
No, Age of Ashes is Daniel Abraham.
Oh,
it's his newest book. I've only heard one person say good things about it, and that's Alan. I'm gonna read it because I like Abraham. Like no one likes Dagger.
The Company, one of my favorite books of last year, second only to Augustus. 3.48.
Ooh, really?
He's so happy about this.
Alan, because he likes to be unpopular. So
I just like to prove how wrong everybody is. So when people are like, you know what? You were right. I'm like, I know.
Alan, after A Shadow in Summer, do the rest of the LPQ books have lower ratings, or do
I want to know
the trailer 4 and 5 don't. Or sorry, Autumn War and Spring don't. They're in the 4s. I don't know about Betrayal. Let me look for that one.
I'm pretty sure the Dagger and Coin, every single book is in the 3.
Because that typically with series, you will see the ratings for each subsequent book go a little bit higher.
Numbers go down, and
the fans stay with the series.
Betrayal in Winter is 3.9, and then the others I know are 4. I know Autumn War's in the 4s.
But A Shadow in Summer is 3.6. You said
3.68,
which is really ridiculous. I think
I agree
with Johanna and you. Yeah. That's a good choice.
It just even with The Darkness Comes Before, that book has so much effort in it. Like even if you don't like the style of it or whatever, like it's clearly something that is like well crafted in my opinion, and that's where like I struggle to give a book a 3-star if I even enjoyed it. You know what I mean? I don't know. Ratings are weird. It's tough. I found a lot of my favorite reads though on Goodreads are like that mid 3s. It happens a lot.
Okay. Hold on. So let me read you this. This is why. And it doesn't surprise me. So here's a 2-star review of The Company. All righty, I'm calling quits on this one. I just can't really muster up the interest in this to go another half of a book. Nothing has happened. Nothing is happening. And from a lot of comments and reviews, it looks like the only happening to occur is at the very end, and I'm just not that patient. So not this is a bad book, but I just can't bring myself to keep plugging away at it for 48% more for maybe a little payoff. I just need something more to keep me interested. And that's what I'm saying. If you're not interested in like the stuff that Parker talks about, you ain't gonna be interested because nothing happens.
I think it's almost done a disservice that it's like put with like a bunch of other fantasy books. Like it's in like the recommends with it. Because I told you my
fantasy about KJ Parker. It's like
that's what I'm saying. It's not. It's just a secondary world. Like it's less magical than Guy Gavriel Kay's stuff, which is already as least magical as you can.
Well, really especially his series or his standalones. Like the novellas have magic in them. There's I have none of the standalones. The actual novels have any magic. It's literally just it's historical fiction, but the world isn't real. Like it's historical fiction set in a world that is not ours.
Jordan, I think you might like The Company. I think you would enjoy it. Just know that there's no fantasy in it. It's just
if you like moral relativism and crap like that, go ahead. You go ahead and read it. moral subjectivity in the company.
I do. I mean, like, I don't demand that my personal values be reflected by the book that I read, so I might actually like it. I might actually enjoy it.
I think you would.
Are some of you guys reading Glenn Cook? Is that good?
I love the Black Company so far. Alan's read them all. I just finished book 3, and I mean, I love it. But it is literally military fantasy. Yeah. Like, it doesn't have a lot of like the other things, like Malazan, right? Is military fantasy, but sprinkles in this other stuff. Like, it is military fantasy.
The thing I like about Cook, they're a mercenary company. They're hired to fight wars
and fighting on the wrong side, like, which is in the early 80s. That's crazy, right? I also love it because it has wacky D&D stuff in it, like flying carpets. Like, I just think that's awesome. Cool. And I just think that Cook has a way of like writing atmosphere through like the chronicling like device that I've never seen anybody else do. And I've read a lot of chronicling tales that I enjoy and love. Farseer by Robin Hobb is a chronicling, and I love it. But Glenn Cook, I mean, he can make you feel like things are like dripping in like grease or something. And it's not that it's overly grotesque, but like, I don't know. He just gets the atmosphere of these scenes where like the limper walks in, which is a very important character.
You'll like Age of Ash if you like that kind of atmosphere. That's one thing he does. Abraham does really well.
Oh, I'm going to like Age of Ash. I know I am. I love Abraham. He's never written a book I dislike. Even Expanse books that people are like, yeah, this one's okay. I've loved them. I've just loved them.
Really quick, I have to go. My wife is waiting for me to eat dinner, and I have company here. So is that okay? I'm sorry. Like, I have to.
Life calls.
My friend is here, and my wife is here.
I'm about to
say hi to your friend and to Christina.
I shall. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
I will catch the end of this on replay, where I can listen to the horrible. Just know y'all are being watched. I got KGB following y'all, just like in Chernobyl. So.
Goodness.
Right. Thank you for having me. We should talk about philosophy some more.
Yeah.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
What a Dickens hater.
Yeah. I'm going to go cry later, like in the bathroom alone. Question. As booktubers, do you guys ever feel pressured to read certain books that are more popular? Do you guys, do you ever feel that pull of, I want my channel to grow. I want to tap into something that is, part of the sort of zeitgeist of the community, or do you just follow your internal compass? What's that equation like for you guys in terms of making sure that your content appeals to the widest possible audience, but also like reading exactly what you want to read? That's one of the reasons I love Johanna's channel, is because she seems to read whatever she wants to read, and her taste coincides with mine, right? So, and I share your taste too, Johanna. We have very similar taste. You and I both like smoky backroom politics, wizards debating over things, complexity, nuance, unpredictability, and all of that. But I just wanted to know, just for all of you guys, if you feel pulled to read things that are popular, or if you take the approach to your channel that I do, which is I kind of am just reading what I want to read, and hopefully like people end up liking my channel, and maybe I get subscribers at the end of the day, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's been how I've operated for the last 3.5 years. It's sometimes I end up liking popular stuff, but I mean, nobody likes China Mieville. Like, if you're watching my channel, you like China Mieville, but like the zeitgeist is never going to pick up the scar and be like, wow, that's never going to happen. And I think I would even argue that if you are a booktuber and you are concerned about your audience growing and you're like, I got to read these popular books, I think you're already on the wrong foot. I don't think reviewing books is the way to grow a large audience. And I'm not saying you can't grow with that. You can, 100%. But I'm talking about if you're really worried about growth, you should be doing something completely different than anybody else. The best example of this is Library Ladder. Library Ladder, his channel is doing extremely well. He's making content he wants to make. It's original content that we don't really have in the BookTube sphere. And it's also beneficial because it's educational. So I would argue that it's not even really about reading the most popular books, because he covered the Ballantine publishers from like the 60s. And I didn't know what that was until I read it, but I trust him. He's very, very well read, and he's well informed. So like, I would even say, if you're watching this and you're like, I really just want my channel to be massive, like, first off, you got to do what you want to do, but two, you should approach it from a different angle. I think that's the better way of going about it. I've never felt pressure to read popular books unless if people say, hey, you would really like this, except for one. And I didn't really feel like reading it at the time, and I read it at the time, and I did enjoy it, but it was not something I wanted to do at the time. And that was the Red Rising trilogy. And I mean, I literally had maybe 100, and this is early in the channel, but like literally maybe over 100 comments saying you should read Red Rising. So I just did it, and I went into it not begrudgingly, but when you're not in the mood for something, like you're just not in the mood for it. And I reviewed it. It had some great moments and highs and lows of whatever, and I put up my review for it. But that was like the one time when I finished filming, and I was like, I don't think I wanted to make this video, and it really bothered me. And I almost quit BookTube after that because I was like, why did I do this? And it felt like I was just listening to the masses, which I think viewer feedback is actually extremely important. I think that people can even I always take recommendations serious because like they might put me onto my new favorite author that I've never heard of, but this felt a little bit different to me. And that is the one time. And actually that video, people love it. And it's not that I lied in it or I wasn't truthful. I said all my thoughts. And I had a good time with it, but it just wasn't a video I planned on making. And that bothered me a lot. But that was like 3 years ago at this point. So I don't know if that answered the question. I think.
Oh, yeah. What about you guys?
I kind of had first, a similar story. I did read the Red Rising trilogy when I first started my channel. Up until the first book in the second series. And it wasn't a bad read. I didn't dislike it. I just didn't click with it, I think, on the level that the fandom did. And I was doing it, Alan, if you're watching this, I did this for you because he was having a read along. And I felt so bad that I just couldn't, I ended up dropping off at a certain point because I was just like, I just couldn't feel the buzz with this particular series. But I think I was very fortunate with my channel in a way, as far as this is concerned, because before I started my channel, I was feeling the urge to be in all the conversations and read all the popular stuff. And I went through a phase where I was reading a lot of Brandon Sanderson, and I enjoyed my time reading that stuff. But I went through a phase right before I started my channel where a bunch of new releases came out, and I wanted to be on top of every single one. I won't name the specific books, but they were all super, super popular at the time. And every single one just didn't excite me. And I was so disappointed. And I just decided I wasn't going to focus on that in my channel. And as soon as I started my channel, I was like, I can't do that. I have to do what feels good to me, what I feel called towards. And it did not necessarily lead towards maybe the biggest channel growth, but I think it's definitely, you could see through it. I know I didn't watch that Red Rising video you're talking about, Jimmy, but I feel like you can feel it when somebody does a video and they're not really into it. They're not really into the book.
Yeah.
So I never want that to be my channel. And so I do focus on things I want to read. I think that's really important to me. And we do have similar tastes, Jordan. I remember just being so thrilled because I think the first video I saw of yours was your amazing philosophical analysis of the never-ending story of a chapter from that, which is one of my favorite books from since I was a teen. Yeah. And I just love that you pointed out some very adult themes in this middle grade book. And it just it spoke to me so much. So
I have kind of a different philosophy than Jimmy, though. I think that Jimmy's 100% correct and right that the best way to grow your channel is to maybe not do book reviews. But when I started this channel, I said all I ever want to do is evergreen content. So I don't want ephemeral TBR videos and weekly updates and monthly updates and that sort of thing. And I respect all the people who do that. It's a lot of fun. I watch those videos. I love Mike's channel and I tune into almost all of his content, but I just don't want to be that. So I want to make big, long, heady, deep dives into books, book reviews. And if my channel grows really slowly and I only ever end up with 5,000 subscribers, I'm okay with that because I'm having so much fun. And I'm like, and I like, curating like a library of my thoughts my deepest thoughts about all these different books. So I'm aware that this is the recipe for slow channel growth, but I just am not willing to do it any other way. And so I'm just going to keep doing it this way, even though I admit I wish I could be one of those people like Mike that just turns on the camera and like he's got all this stuff in his head and he just rambles it off and it's always entertaining. I'm just not talented in that exact same way. I have to like let books marinate for a while. I have to like really like get my thoughts together, and then I have to let it spill out. But what about you, Philip?
Yeah, well, the majority of my videos are more than an hour-long discussions of specific books, which is not exactly the sexiest thing on YouTube right now. So yeah, but I will do TBR video. I do seasonal TBR. I do the thing that everyone does at the end of the year, like favorite reads of the year. And those are videos that tend to drive growth more than my long discussions that I love so much.
Really? Like what discussions are you talking about?
You name it. You name it. I mean, any like, even like Dear Dr. Fantasy doesn't really get good numbers. I mean, I love it because I'm meeting people and getting to talk with them and find out what's interesting to them, and so it's a lot of fun. So what I like is definitely not what's popular most of the time. I mean, enough people like it that it works, and I will say that I don't feel like I've ever been pressured to read something because a lot of people like it. I think I'm usually behind the crowd when it comes to popular reads. I'm well behind the crowd, but what I have done is read books because a specific friend has wanted me to read the book. So, you know, like Jimmy wanted me to read the Prince of Nothing trilogy. He also wants me to read the rest of that series. But,
So badly.
yeah, I will eventually. You know, Alan got me to read LPQ. He got me to read, I'm finishing up Books of Babel. Johanna actually threatened to kneecap me if I didn't read Stoner. So, you know, that's, yeah, it was pretty serious. So yeah, I mean, I've read stuff because of my friendships, my relationships, and getting to talk about those books with those people has been the most wonderful, precious thing that I could have ever asked for from this platform. So that's why I'm here. And if it grows the channel, great. If it doesn't, fine. But I do it because I love it.
Brilliant.
I'm gonna add something real quick. Book reviews are better than TBRs and wrap-ups for growing your channel. 100%. They may not perform at front, but that they're evergreen, and you can attract someone from an entirely different decade. If you cover Elric, you're going to get people. No one talks about this, man. I got so many comments on my Elric video like that, and I poured them to your video, Jordan, because you went way more thorough with it. And
I appreciate it.
But I mean, I really do believe that reviews still have their place, but they're not gonna do, you know, what a documentary style video might do or a top 10 video might do. But I'll be honest, I actually don't think the TBR stuff's for the people who already watch you. They want to know. Like I do my In a Nutshell wrap-ups. Those always do the exact same number of views because it's the exact, it's the subscriber saying it. I never see new viewers from a wrap-up ever. Never, ever. Yeah. So I think reviews still have a place. It's just like when I'm talking about like, you know, going for growth, you would need to approach it from a different perspective because let's face it, everybody posts a wrap up. I mean, everybody does it, you know, so
I don't
really.
Well, I know, but I'm saying there's so many out there that, you're not missing out by not doing it, to be honest. Like I really don't think so. I think your time would be, again, if the aim is for people to come to the channel that are new, you'd be better off reviewing books. And I actually think, Jordan, that deep dives into books, I do think they're popular, depending on how you do them. Clearly, no one's going to care about, you know, if I pick a random book that's not popular. The Bitter Twins by Jen Williams. I don't know. 10 people are going to watch that, right? But Elric, I think Elric's pretty popular.
Yeah.
I don't think it is, though.
No,
I don't think it is. I think on Goodreads,
totally
well, according to Goodreads, Goodreads is so unreliable.
Goodreads has only been around for so long. I'm telling you, Elric is extreme. You want to know how I know? Because go watch Library Ladder's Michael Moorcock video.
Right, but you're right, Johanna. People do see Moorcock as an underrated author. Like they
I
see
do.
him as someone that the majority of people don't know about, but they should know about,
And that's
and that sort of thing. But I've got one more question for you guys, and then I'm going to let you guys go and have your evening. This is a big question. Hopefully, I can hear from everyone. Why fantasy and sci-fi, guys? What do you find particularly compelling about speculative fiction? You guys started BookTube channels. You could have picked any genre that you wanted. And I know some of you, especially you, Johanna, dabble outside of the genre. What keeps you always coming back for more fantasy and sci-fi?
I think it's wonder for me. The word wonder. Like, I love books that make me wonder, that not only get me to question things, but leave me just in a state of wonder. That's the number one thing. I love to feel immersed in my stories. I love to connect emotionally to my stories. And I'm very much a visual reader. So I love to, I visualize what I read. But really, at the end of the day, I think it's like, if it leaves me with a sense of wonder, I just think there's no better feeling than that to me. This expansion.
It's really good.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Philip?
Well, I would first like to just agree with Johanna, who said that very beautifully about wonder. Fantasy is in some ways the oldest form of storytelling, if you include myth and that sort of thing. And I think there's a similar impulse at the heart of fantasy that humanity has felt from time immemorial, even probably well before we were able to write. People told stories of gods and things that were crafted from human imagination. And I think that this is one of the things that I love about fantasy is that it allows the exercise of the imagination, perhaps more than any other genre. And that's a beautiful thing because even as it does that, it also engages us with very important, this is kind of going back to where we started. We're circling back in a way because it helps us to engage with the big questions, with human experience, with our joys and our suffering and our triumphs and our sorrows. And it allows us to do it with that psychic distance in oftentimes created worlds where it doesn't necessarily talk about stuff that's maybe just too painful because it's part of our world, but similar things are happening in that made up world that allow us to see what we're going through in a new light, or to struggle through it, or to feel a sense of meaning. Because fantasy, I think, is really great for offering a sense of meaning in a world that often feels pretty pointless, meaningless, So all of that, for me, I think it's just the kind of storytelling that I've always loved ever since I was a kid. And it made me feel meaningful and like I belong. I like a sense of connection, and that's what I really love about it.
Jimmy?
I think mine's the male gaze. I just love knowing that a book is going to describe a bosom whenever they fold their arms. It's just, it's unmatched. I mean, Robert Jordan wrote 14 books, and the best. No, I'm just kidding. Part of it's
actually he was 15 because he wrote the prequel too.
Oh, was there a bosom in that?
It doesn't count if it doesn't.
Bosoms, yes.
Sold. So other than male gaze, for me, part of it's escapism. Part of it is I've always had a fascination what if things were different? Like if you change one variable in our world or add a variable or take away a variable, like what would have changed about how we came along? And for fantasy specifically, I feel like I have a really pessimistic worldview. Like I would definitely say I'm more on the nihilistic side. So seeing those type of things explored, strangely enough, like things are broken in other worlds in a different way they're broken in ours. Somehow that gives me almost a camaraderie with these characters that are going through this stuff. And it's distance enough to where I don't get super depressed whenever I read it, because I read darker stuff most of the time. But also there are stories that fill me with hope and are having an exactly opposite worldview of someone like me. or, you know, someone that has the opposite worldview, I can kind of, it's easier for me to slide into those shoes, I guess is how I should say it. And the fact that I do think fantasy does a really nice job of not forgetting the plot as well. I think that's important. And I think it provides a lot of entertainment, which I don't think is a bad thing. And with sci-fi, science fiction has always been fascinating to me whenever it, again, takes a very pessimistic view on technology and the dangers of it. Like, I think it a lot of times it's a forewarning. I really like Peter Watts, who I read for the first time this year, Blind Sight. He does not write optimistic science fiction in the least. He is not someone like a Neil Stephenson who would do that. Funny story about Peter Watts. He was asked to write a optimistic, like, new age hope story. Like, how could science fiction be used for the good? Like, it's going to affect the attitude of the world, which, you know, he said, one, you guys are arrogant. Science fiction is not going to change the public discourse. And then his optimistic sci-fi short story was that someone invented a virus to kill all of the billionaires in the world, which is so not optimistic, right? Like, and they never invited him back because they did it again and he didn't get invited. But, you know, being able to say, like, hey guys, this could go really wrong. Like, I don't know. There's something about that has always intrigued me. And I do think that, like, the cliff is something we think about, like, how far is too far gone. I think that you can explore those things in fantasy and sci-fi and get away with the fact that it doesn't have to be 100% realistic unless you're going in super hard sci-fi. So all those things I think add into that. But, you know, I would say that Johanna and Philip had the better answer. Like, those are my answers, but this is me just adding on other things. The extra credit, I guess.
No, it's a wonderful addition. Yeah.
Brilliant. Wonderful. And I have a unique perspective that there's actually no such thing as a nihilist, Jimmy, but we'll have to talk about that another time.
I would love to.
And I appreciate you, buddy. Thanks for coming on. Thank you, Philip and Johanna, for coming on as well. This was Side Quests, and I'll see you guys later. Happy reading.
Thanks, man.
Ta-ta.